Why are you here in a lift, Chloe? What happened to the limited edition Tesla Model S plaid I bought you when you closed your Series A? My grandmother, Evelyn, asked, her sharp hazel eyes missing absolutely nothing, as we sat in the private oak-paneled dining room of an exclusive invite-only steakhouse in downtown San Jose. Before I could even open my mouth to explain, my mother, Victoria, took a casual, slow sip of her expensive Napa Valley Cabernet, exhaled a dramatic sigh, and swirled the dark liquid in her glass. Amber needed it more. Victoria said, her voice dripping with an unbothered, smooth nonchalance. Chloe is single and completely obsessed with her laptop anyway, so she can just take a rideshare. Luxury electric vehicles are for people with real high-profile families who actually have media appearances to make. The absolute suffocating silence that followed her statement was deafening. But that silence was nothing compared to the legal and financial storm I was about to unleash on them. My name is Chloe, and I am 35 years old. For my entire life, I have been treated as the invisible, bottomless bank account for a family that values superficial Silicon Valley status over basic human decency. They thought they could walk all over me, manipulate me, and treat me like an awkward tech drone just because I kept my wealth quiet and my lifestyle minimalist. They had no idea that their latest stunt had crossed a definitive legal line. They had no idea I was about to use the full weight of federal law to completely dismantle their entire fraudulent, debt-ridden lives. Before I tell you exactly how a middle-of-the-night vehicle theft turned into a catastrophic Federal Bureau of Investigation and IRS fraud case, let me know where you are watching this from in the comments below. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. If you have ever had to deal with toxic, narcissistic relatives who mistake your quiet boundaries for absolute weakness, we were gathered at one of the most prestigious, high-end culinary establishments in the heart of the Silicon Valley tech corridor to celebrate my grandmother Evelyn's 80th birthday. Evelyn is an absolute living legend in the financial world. She built a powerhouse hedge fund from scratch in the late 1980s, with nothing but raw grit, mathematical genius, and a cold-blooded market instinct. She is also, predictably, the only person in my entire biological family who ever bothered to see my true potential. While my parents, Victoria and Charles, were busy grooming my younger sister Amber to look pretty date tech executives and curate a flawless artificial lifestyle online, Evelyn was the one slipping me books on venture capital, advanced corporate structures, and algorithmic investment strategies. I arrived at the restaurant exactly at 7 p.m. Stepping out of a standard baseline lift vehicle, I was dressed elegantly but highly understated in a tailored charcoal grey pantsuit. No massive logos, no flashy jewelry. That was always my core strategy. I manage Aegis Ventures, a powerhouse venture capital firm with over $800 million in assets under management. But my family still stubbornly treats me like the socially awkward, unlovable middle manager they assumed I became when I graduated college. To them, I was just Chloe, the boring single workaholic who lived in a plain two-bedroom apartment and existed solely to absorb their financial emergencies when their credit lines dried up. My parents were already seated when I walked into the private room. My mother wore a brand new designer dress that I knew for a fact was purchased on a premium credit card, currently carrying an predatory 26% interest rate. My father, Charles, sported a leased luxury sports car key fob on the table, a fake Patek Philippe watch on his wrist, and the arrogant, puffed-up posture of a man who loved playing the role of a tech mogul. They barely even looked up or acknowledged my existence as I took my seat next to my grandmother. That was precisely when Evelyn noticed my method of arrival. Her piercing question about the matte black Tesla Model S plaid cut right through the pretentious, low-volume classical music playing through the restaurant's hidden speakers. She had funded that specific vehicle for me right after I secured my firm's first massive high-stakes tech acquisition. It was a beautiful, high-performance machine, but more importantly, it was a physical symbol of her unwavering belief in my capability. Hearing my mother casually dismiss my ownership of a $140,000 vehicle as if it were a communal family umbrella made my blood boil beneath my calm exterior. Amber needed it more. Chloe is single, so she can just take a lift. Victoria said it so smoothly, completely unbothered, by the sheer unadulterated audacity of her actions. I looked across the table at my mother, marveling at the sheer depth of her delusion. This was the exact same woman who 5 years ago emotionally manipulated me into taking on $70,000 of high-interest debt because, according to her frantic middle-of-the-night phone calls, Amber absolutely needed a flawless financial cosigner to secure a luxury high-rise apartment in San Francisco to build her brand. I paid it off to keep the peace, but I learned my lesson. I completely stopped sharing my financial reality, my promotions, and my wealth with them. Because of my total silence, they assumed I had stagnated. They assumed I was weak, trapped in a corporate cubicle, earning a mediocre salary. They assumed that my property was by extension their property to redistribute whenever Amber threw a tantrum. Before my grandmother could unleash the fury, I saw visibly brewing in her sharp eyes. The heavy frosted glass doors of the private dining room swung open. In walked my 28-year-old sister Amber, wearing a designer coat she couldn't afford, and carrying a luxury handbag that likely cost more than her entire savings account. Beside her was her husband Marcus. They thought they had won a brilliant victory over the boring, quiet older sister. They thought I would just swallow the humiliation order my steak and keep the peace at a family birthday dinner. They relied heavily on my usual strategy of walking away from their chaotic drama. But this time they had miscalculated terribly. They did not realize that the Chloe they bullied and manipulated years ago no longer existed. The woman sitting at this table controlled the capital that funded the very tech ecosystem they tried so desperately to pretend they belonged to, and more importantly, they had absolutely no idea about the specific ironclad legal trap they had just walked into. I slowly picked up my linen napkin, placed it on my lap, and waited for the jaws of the trap to snap completely shut. The heavy, frosted glass doors swung shut, sealing the tension inside the private dining room. Amber strutted in her heels, clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor, completely oblivious, or perhaps entirely indifferent, to the thick cloud of hostility hanging in the air. She wore a smug, self-satisfied grin, her face heavily contoured for the social media vlogs she claimed were her full-time job. Beside her, Marcus adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, carrying himself with the rigid, calculated posture of a man who spent his life climbing the ultra-competitive corporate ladder at a major Silicon Valley FAANG tech giant. Marcus was a highly ambitious senior software engineer, a brilliant black man who had fought tooth and nail through cutthroat tech spaces to secure his lucrative stock options and pristine professional reputation. But Amber had hooked him by engineering a massive high-stakes lie. She had convinced Marcus that she was the golden heiress to our grandmother Evelyn's legendary hedge fund fortune. Marcus genuinely believed he had married into a family of generational wealth and elite financial power, completely unaware that the designer clothes on his wife's back were funded by high-interest predatory loans and our parents' rapidly evaporating retirement accounts. Amber glided over to the table, ignoring the ice-cold glare radiating from grandmother Evelyn. With a theatrical sweeping motion, she reached into her luxury handbag, pulled out a sleek, modern device, and dramatically tossed it onto the pristine white tablecloth. The heavy, customized Tesla keycard landed with a sharp, echoing clatter right next to my crystal water glass. "Thanks for the extra car, Chloe." Amber smirked her perfectly glossed lips, curving into a sneer of pure, unadulterated entitlement. I mean, it's a little basic and utilitarian for my taste, but Marcus took it to a premium custom shop in Palo Alto over the weekend and got it wrapped in a gorgeous matte Nardo grey. It actually looks somewhat respectable now. You really shouldn't have kept a top-tier performance vehicle sitting in a garage just to drive to your depressing little IT office. It was a total waste of a good dual-motor engine. Marcus nodded, confidently smoothing his tie as he offered me a polite, professional smile. "Yeah, I really appreciate it, Chloe. Amber told me you guys bought it for her as a collective wedding anniversary gift. The acceleration on that plaid model is absolutely unreal. It drives like a dream. Let us pause and examine the sheer, staggering magnitude of that moment. Not only had my parents actively orchestrated the middle-of-the-night theft of my vehicle from my secure residential parking garage using a spare keycard I had foolishly left at their house years ago during a holiday visit, but Amber had actively constructed a web of lies for her husband, claiming the vehicle was a generous family gift to celebrate their anniversary. Marcus stood there, puffed up with pride, entirely blissfully oblivious to the fact that he was currently driving a stolen corporate vehicle. He thought he had married into an aristocratic family of benevolent millionaires. He had absolutely no idea he had married into a family of desperate, debt-ridden frauds who literally stole from their own quiet daughter to maintain a fake lifestyle. I did not yell. I did not cry. I didn't even blink. Years of sitting across the negotiation table from ruthless venture capitalists, activist investors, and cutthroat corporate sharks had taught me the supreme power of absolute stillness. When you are about to destroy an opponent, you never telegraph your move. I looked down at the matte Zamek grey keycard resting on the white linen. Then I looked up at my sister, who was already snapping her fingers to signal a waiter, acting as if she owned the Michelin-starred establishment. Across the table, my father Charles beamed at her, his face flushed with proud satisfaction, aggressively validating the illusion she had created. They thought they had won. They thought the boring, single, quiet sister would just swallow the humiliation, internalize the financial loss, and pretend everything was fine, just to avoid making a scene at a family birthday dinner. They relied on my historical strategy of walking away from their toxic, chaotic drama. But they had miscalculated the math terribly. They did not realize that the Chloe they had bullied, manipulated, and financially bled 5 years ago no longer existed. The woman sitting across from them now wielded the power to greenlight or crush entire tech startups before her morning coffee. And more importantly, they didn't realize the specific catastrophic legal trap they had just walked into, with a smile on their faces. I slowly picked up my glass of water, taking a measured, deliberate sip, letting the silence stretch until it became physically uncomfortable. Beside me, I could feel Grandmother Evelyn's posture turn rigid, with a cold, calculating corporate fury. She and I shared the exact same shark instincts, the same ability to spot a fatal vulnerability in an adversary's position. I looked at my mother, whose face was flushed with cheap confidence, and then at my father, who was still playing with his fake Patek Philippe. The trap was officially set. The bait had been taken, swallowed whole, and digested. The jaws of federal and corporate law were hovering right over their necks, and I was about to let them snap completely shut. The suffocating silence in the private dining room deepened, stretching until the soft hum of the restaurant's hidden speakers felt incredibly intrusive. My parents sat with smug, radiating satisfaction, their shoulders relaxed fully, expecting me to shrink back and swallow the bitter pill of humiliation, just as I always did. Amber was already busy checking her reflection in the polished curve of a silver spoon, patting her hair into place. Marcus stood tall beside her, casually adjusting the lapels of his expensive suit, waiting for my expression of humble gratitude or a quiet nod of compliance. But Grandmother Evelyn did not scream. She did not raise her voice to a theatrical pitch. She did not even look visibly angry. Instead, she reached for her crisp linen napkin elegantly and deliberately dabbed the corners of her mouth, and placed it back onto the white tablecloth with the calculated precision of a surgeon. Victoria Grandmother Evelyn began her tone as casual and airy, as if she were merely discussing the unseasonable Silicon Valley weather. You and Charles just committed corporate grand theft and federal tax fraud. My mother froze instantly. Her premium Cabernet wine glass stopped exactly halfway to her lips, suspended in midair. My father Charles let out a loud, forced, dismissive laugh, waving his hand dismissively in the air, as if waving away a mild annoyance. "Oh, mother, please," he scoffed, puffing out his chest. Stop being so incredibly dramatic. We didn't steal anything. We simply reallocated an underutilized family vehicle. Chloe practically lives at her venture capital office anyway, and barely drives the thing. We transferred the vehicle to Amber because she and Marcus have high-profile client meetings and media events. It's called keeping assets in the family. Evelyn leaned forward slowly, resting her elbows on the pristine tablecloth. Her sharp hazel eyes locking onto my father with the absolute intensity of an apex predator cornering defenseless prey. "Charles," she said, her voice dropping into a register of pure ice. "I did not purchase Chloe a personal vehicle for her 27th birthday. I authorized the transfer of a corporate asset to a specific limited liability company. That Tesla Model S Plaid is legally registered under a private financial holding group. It is not personal property. It is a depreciating commercial asset, utilized strictly for corporate tax deductions." My parents stared at her blankly, their mouths opening slightly. They were so fundamentally accustomed to living paycheck to paycheck on maxed-out credit cards and pretending to understand high-net-worth wealth that the actual rigid mechanics of corporate finance completely escaped their comprehension. But Marcus understood. I watched the exact millisecond the terrifying reality of the situation crashed into his brain. As a high-earning senior software engineer who dealt with corporate equity tech stock options and strict compliance laws every day, he knew exactly what a holding company was. More importantly, he knew the absolute legal nightmares associated with mishandling, altering, and transporting corporate assets across state lines. "Wait a minute," Marcus said, his confident voice suddenly tightening, pitching slightly higher with a sudden surge of panic. He looked down at the matte Zamek grey keycard on the table, as if the plastic had suddenly caught fire. "What exactly do you mean it's a corporate asset?" I decided it was time to step in and drive the nail into the coffin. I picked up my water glass, took a slow, agonizingly deliberate sip, and looked directly into the widening eyes of my brother-in-law. "The vehicle belongs to Aegis Ventures," I explained, keeping my voice perfectly flat, calm, and conversational. "That is a venture capital firm. I am the chief executive officer and majority stakeholder of that firm. That specific Tesla is legally registered to the corporation for executive transport and operational travel. Because you took possession of it without explicit corporate authorization or a signed board resolution, you are currently in possession of stolen commercial property. And because my parents apparently generated a fraudulent gift title transfer to avoid paying state asset taxes, they have officially triggered a federal tax fraud violation with the Internal Revenue Service." Amber rolled her eyes dramatically, crossing her arms tightly over her designer coat. "Oh, stop using big tech words to try and scare everyone, Chloe. You are just bitter and mad because I got the top-tier car and you have to crawl around in a pathetic lift. Mum and Dad gave it to me. They signed the legal paperwork." Marcus spun around to face his wife, his eyes wide with a volatile mixture of profound confusion and rapidly rising terror. "Amber, what exact paperwork did they sign? You sat in our living room and told me this car was a direct, clean gift from your parents. You explicitly told me they bought it for you brand new to celebrate our anniversary." "I never said it was brand new." Amber deflected instantly, her voice pitching into a defensive shriek. "I said it was new to us. And Mum and Dad had the spare key card, so they just gave it to me to help my brand image." "It's totally fine, Marcus. Chloe is just being a jealous, dramatic loser like she always is." "It is not fine." "Amber." Marcus slammed his hand down onto the table, making the fine silverware and crystal glasses rattle violently. He was a man who had fought tooth and nail to build his engineering career, surviving ruthless tech layoffs and corporate politics to secure his pristine legal and financial record. His software license, his corporate security clearances, and his clean background check were his entire livelihood. He could not afford a single legal misstep, let alone being implicated in a grand theft auto case. He glared at my parents, his expression hardening into absolute unadulterated anger. "You told me you owned the vehicle cleanly," Marcus snarled at Charles. "You told me you transferred the title. I took that car to a custom shop in Palo Alto and spent $6,000 of my own money wrapping it and upgrading the software under my credit card." My mother, Victoria, waved her manicured hand dismissively. Her face suddenly flushed with a volatile mixture of cheap Cabernet and deep embarrassment. "Oh, Marcus, calm down. It is just a minor family dispute. Chloe is just being difficult and dramatic as usual. We will simply have her sign the corporate title over to you tomorrow morning and make everything official. Right, Chloe? You will just sign the paperwork and we can all move on from this silly little misunderstanding." I smiled at my mother. It was the exact kind of razor-sharp smile that never reached my eyes. A cold, calculated smile I reserved exclusively for hostile corporate takeovers. "I cannot sign the title over to you, Mum," I said, my voice cutting through her frantic rationalization like a scalpel. "Doing so would require a formal board resolution from my company, a comprehensive asset valuation, and a public declaration of corporate asset liquidation. Furthermore, since Marcus just openly admitted to altering a registered corporate vehicle by wrapping it and modifying the software without authorization, my firm is legally obligated by our compliance bylaws to file a police report for vandalism and destruction of corporate property." My father Charles slammed his fist on the table, his fake Patek Philippe rattling against his wrist. "You will do no such thing. You will not call the police on your own flesh and blood. I am your father, and I demand that you sign that car over to your sister right now. You have more than enough money to go out and buy another one this afternoon." I leaned back in my leather chair, matching his exploding rage with absolute unyielding ice. "You do not demand anything from me, Charles," I said, my voice dropping into a lethal, quiet whisper that forced everyone to lean in just to hear me. "You used an unauthorized key card to illegally enter my secure private residential parking garage in the middle of the night. You drove away in a vehicle that does not belong to you. You handed it to your favored daughter to maintain the pathetic illusion that you are wealthy benefactors in Thung Lung Silicon. But you are not wealthy. You are common thieves." Marcus stepped away from the table, entirely physically distancing himself from Amber, as if she were radioactive. He looked down at his wife with an expression of utter, deep-seated disgust. "You lied to me," Marcus said, his breathing becoming heavy and ragged. "You sat in our living room and told me your parents were unloading one of their extra luxury vehicles because they were upgrading. You let me drive a stolen corporate car to my engineering team meetings at FANG for the past 3 days. Do you have any earthly idea what would happen to my senior software license, my corporate stock options, and my security clearance if I got pulled over by the police in a stolen venture capital vehicle?" "Baby, please!" Amber whined, her perfectly curated influencer facade instantly crumbling as she reached out to grab his arm. "It's not actually stolen. It's just a stupid legal technicality. Chloe is just being a horrible, bitter sister. She will fix it. She always fixes things for us when things get messy." "I am not fixing anything for you this time, Amber," I stated clearly, ensuring every single syllable landed with maximum destructive impact. "By 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, Aegis Ventures' corporate legal team will officially report the vehicle as stolen to the authorities. The San Jose Police Department will trace the vehicle's location data straight back to you, Marcus, since you took it to a custom body shop in Palo Alto and left a pristine digital paper trail with your own credit card." Marcus yanked his arm out of Amber's grasp, so fast she stumbled backward into her chair. His eyes darted frantically between my panicked parents and his sobbing wife. The grand illusion he had married into the lie of elite Silicon Valley tech wealth and generational hedge fund fortunes was shattering into a million jagged pieces right in front of him. He finally saw them for exactly what they were. They weren't high society tech aristocrats. They were desperate, debt-ridden, low-level grifters. "I am leaving," Marcus announced, his voice dangerously low, practically vibrating with fury. He pointed a trembling, rigid finger straight at Amber's face. "Do not follow me back to the apartment. Do not call my phone. I need to figure out how I am going to contact a corporate defense attorney tonight to keep myself out of federal prison because of your insane, fraudulent family." He turned sharply on his heel, marched out of the private dining room, and slammed the heavy oak door behind him without looking back a single time. Amber stood there, her mouth hanging wide open in absolute paralyzed shock as the echo of the slamming door reverberated through the room. The very first crack in their perfect artificial curated lifestyle had just split wide open, and the foundation was about to completely give way. Beside me, my grandmother Evelyn slowly picked up her wineglass, took a long, leisurely, deeply satisfied sip, and smiled. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut completely, cutting off the sound of Marcus's retreating footsteps. For a solid, agonized moment, the only noise inside the private dining room was the ragged, panicked breathing of my sister. Amber stared blankly at the closed door, her perfectly curated influencer facade entirely crumbling to dust as the terrifying reality of her husband's departure settled over her. Then the shock evaporated, and the room absolutely exploded. "Charles!" My father lunged violently out of his chair, his face twisted into a mask of pure crimson rage. He slammed his fist down onto the pristine white tablecloth with such force that my mother's wineglass tipped over. Dark red liquid spilled aggressively across the linen, soaking into the fabric like blood. But nobody in the room cared to clean it up. "Look at what you did!" Charles roared, his voice echoing off the expensive wood-panelled walls of the restaurant. "You drove him away. You ruined your younger sister's marriage over a piece of metal. You are a cold-blooded, heartless monster, Chloe. How dare you sit there and threaten your own flesh and blood with the police and the IRS? Victoria immediately jumped to her feet, taking her place by her husband's side. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate kind of hatred. "You have always been this way." "Chloe," Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of her venom. "You have always been so insanely, pathologically jealous of Amber. Just because she is beautiful, popular, and married to a wonderful, successful senior engineer, you had to find a twisted way to destroy her happiness. You are a bitter, unlovable tech drone who uses complicated legal jargon to try and sound important. You think throwing around words like tax fraud makes you powerful, but you are just a sad, lonely woman trying to drag your own sister down to your miserable level." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice, nor did I rush to defend myself against their pathetic, predictable insults. I simply picked up a clean paper napkin and carefully, methodically wiped a stray drop of spilled Cabernet that had managed to reach the base of my water glass. The sheer, stark contrast between their chaotic screaming and my absolute, unshakable stillness seemed to infuriate my father even more. "Do not ignore us when we are speaking to you," Charles bellowed, taking a threatening, aggressive step toward my side of the table. "You are going to call Marcus right now. You are going to tell him this was all a terrible family misunderstanding. You are going to sign that car title over to Amber tonight, and you are going to beg her for forgiveness. You are nothing but a low-level corporate drone who got lucky enough to be given a company car. Do not act like you own the place. I am your father, and I demand that you fix this mess immediately." I folded the damp napkin with precision and placed it gently on the table. Then I looked up, meeting my father's furious gaze, with eyes as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm over the Pacific. "You fundamentally misunderstand the situation, Charles I," said, keeping my voice dangerously soft, forcing them to completely quiet down just to hear me. "You think I am a low-level employee who was handed a set of keys as a mere corporate perk. You think Aegis Ventures is just some faceless corporation where I clock in and push papers for a meager salary. You think I am using my employer's property to intimidate you." I stood up, slowly pushing my leather chair back. I smoothed the front of my tailored pantsuit, fully asserting my physical presence in the room. Let me clarify exactly who you are dealing with, I stated, enunciating every single syllable with clinical detachment. Aegis Ventures is not my employer. It is my creation. It is a venture capital firm that I built from the ground up entirely on my own. I do not answer to a board of directors. I do not ask for permission to use corporate assets. I am the sole founder, the majority stakeholder, and the chief executive officer of the entire financial group. The air in the private dining room seemed to vanish instantly. My father froze mid-stride, his mouth hanging slightly open as his brain visibly struggled to process the weight of the words I had just spoken. Victoria dropped her hand, clutching the pearl necklace at her throat as if she had just seen a ghost. Amber stopped her dramatic sobbing, her tear-streaked face staring up at me in total, paralyzed bewilderment. "That is impossible," Charles stammered, his aggressive posture deflating in real time. "You don't have that kind of money. You live in a basic apartment. You never talk about your job. You are lying to try and scare us." My grandmother Evelyn chuckled from her seat, a low, rumbling sound of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. "My granddaughter has never lied a day in her life," Charles Evelyn said, her voice laced with sharp, mocking derision. "She simply chose not to share her financial reality with a pack of greedy, superficial parasites. Chloe manages over $800 million in tech investment assets. She owns office buildings, stakes in major AI startups, and commercial real estate across the entire West Coast. She did not buy that Tesla to commute to a cubicle. That car is a microscopic rounding error on her corporate balance sheet." I watched the color drain completely from my mother's face. The realization hit her with the absolute force of a freight train. The daughter she had relentlessly mocked, the daughter she had deemed a social failure, the daughter she had stolen from was a multi-millionaire CEO holding massive financial power. Their entire worldview, built entirely on the illusion of their own superiority, had just been completely pulverized. "You," Victoria gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "You are the CEO. You own all of it." "Yes, Victoria," I replied, stepping around the table to stand directly in front of them. "And because I am the CEO, I am legally bound by fiduciary duty to protect my corporate assets. When you used a stolen spare keycard to drive a registered commercial vehicle out of my private facility, you did not just steal from your daughter. You stole from an $800 million financial institution. My corporate legal team does not care about your family drama. They only care about asset recovery and prosecuting theft." Amber suddenly pushed past our parents, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. She lunged forward and grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured acrylic nails digging into the fabric of my tailored suit jacket. "Chloe, if you are that rich, then you can just buy me another car," Amber cried out, her deep-seated entitlement blinding her completely to the sheer legal danger she was standing in. "You can just give me the money to fix things with Marcus. If you have $800 million, you can write a check for a few million right now to pay off all my debts. Marcus left me because he thinks we are poor. You have to save my marriage, Chloe. You have to write me a check right now." I looked down at my sister's hand, gripping my sleeve. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no biological sisterly obligation. I only saw a parasite desperately demanding a host to feed on. I reached up, grabbed her wrist, and peeled her fingers off my jacket one by one with calculated force. "I do not have to do a single thing for you, Amber," I said, my voice echoing through the silent room like a judge's gavel, delivering a final sentence. "I used my mind and my work to build an empire. You used my wealth to build a pathetic lie. Your husband did not leave you because he thinks you are poor. He left you because he finally realized you are a fraud. And the absolute worst part for you is that I am not going to spend a single cent of my capital to save you from the consequences of your own actions." Victoria gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck across the face. How can you be so heartless? Chloe, we are your family, we raised you. We sacrificed absolutely everything to give you a good life. And this is how you repay us, by letting your younger sister's marriage fall apart over a car. You are standing there talking about police and investigations when you should be writing a check to fix this family. I stepped closer to my mother, closing the physical distance between us until she was forced to lean back and look up directly into my eyes. Sacrificed, I asked, my voice dropping into a lethal whisper. You want to talk about sacrifices, Victoria? Let us talk about my college fund, the one Grandma Evelyn set up for both of us when we were children. I turned my head to glare at Amber, who was still sniffling dramatically, trying to play the ultimate victim for an audience that no longer existed. Do you remember when I was 18 years old, Amber? I asked. You two sat me down at the kitchen table and handed me a legal waiver. You looked me straight in the eye and lied to me. You said the family software business was going through a catastrophic crisis and that you needed my tuition money just to keep a roof over our heads. I believed you. I gave up my dream of attending Stanford University. I went to a local community college and worked grueling night shifts as a waitress to pay my own way through school. I looked back at my mother, whose jaw was clenched tight. But the business wasn't failing, was it, Victoria? I challenged. You took my entire six-figure college fund and used it to pay for Amber's out-of-state tuition at an elite private arts university in New York City because she threw a massive tantrum about wanting the full luxury sorority experience. Charles puffed out his chest, trying to regain a shred of his shattered patriarchal authority. We made a strategic financial decision for the household. Chloe, you were always smart enough to get scholarships and figure things out on your own. Your younger sister needed the extra financial support to succeed in the world. It was an investment in her future. Support! I laughed, a sharp, bitter, humorless sound that cut through the room like a knife. You call it support. I call it grand theft. Just like what you did 5 years ago. I pointed a rigid, unforgiving finger directly at my father's face, forcing him to shrink back slightly against the edge of the dining table. 5 years ago, you came to my tiny, cramped studio apartment, crying. I continued listing the facts with clinical precision. You said the bank was going to foreclose on the family home. You begged me to take out personal loans and max out credit cards under my name because your own credit score was completely destroyed. $70,000. I took on $70,000 of high-interest unsecured debt when I was barely making ends meet, trying to launch my very first software company. I ate ramen noodles for 2 years. I worked 20-hour days and slept on the floor of my office just to avoid defaulting and destroying my own credit score. I did that because I thought I was saving your home. Victoria stepped in front of Charles. Her face flushed red with indignant fury. Her mask of high society elegance had completely melted away, revealing the ugly, greedy truth underneath. You are the older sister, Chloe. It is your duty to help your family. Victoria shrieked, completely unashamed. You had to sacrifice. And we didn't use that money for the house. Amber needed capital to start her business. She had a brilliant idea for a lifestyle brand, and she needed seed money. You were just sitting in front of a computer screen all day. She was out there networking and building a public image. Networking. I repeated the word slowly, letting the absolute absurdity of it wash over the room. I looked at Amber, taking in her designer coat, her pristine blowout, and the diamond bracelet sparkling on her wrist. Is that what we are calling it now? Starting a business by going to luxury spas and buying designer bags. You spent $15,000 on a brand new designer wardrobe at Beverly Hills boutiques within 48 hours of that loan clearing into my account. I stated, my voice cutting through Amber's, sniffling with surgical precision. You spent another $10,000 on a 2-week wellness retreat in Ibiza because you claimed you needed spiritual alignment before launching your lifestyle company. You bought first-class airline tickets, drank vintage champagne, and stayed in five-star oceanfront luxury resorts. You never registered a limited liability company. You never filed a basic business plan. You literally blew $70,000 of my hard-earned debt on a massive shopping spree just to pretend you were a rich tech influencer on Instagram. Amber flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. I was building my brand image, Chloe. You have to spend money to make money. You just don't understand how the modern media and influencer industry works. And while you were sipping cocktails on a Mediterranean beach, I continued, my voice rising with a cold, calculated fury that made my mother step back. I was fielding endless aggressive calls from debt collectors. I was spent my weekends negotiating payment plans with hostile banks. I was sacrificing my own physical sleep, my mental health, and my sanity to cover the monthly minimum payments on premium credit cards that you maxed out. You literally stole my financial future to fund a luxury vacation, and you both actively enabled it. I glared directly at my parents, who refused to meet my eyes. You lied to my face about an impending foreclosure just to fund her ultimate vanity project. Victoria crossed her arms tightly, her chin jutting out defensively, completely refusing to back down or show a single shred of remorse. She was young Chloe. She made a temporary mistake, but she deserved to experience the world and build her high society network. You were always so rigid, so intensely focused on numbers and data. We knew you would figure out a way to pay it off eventually. You always do. And look at you now, you are a millionaire. You manage hundreds of millions of dollars at your firm. Why are you still crying and holding a grudge over $70,000 from 5 years ago? It clearly did not ruin your life. It did not ruin my life because I refused to let you drag me down into the financial grave you dug for yourselves. I fired back, the absolute staggering lack of shame in my mother's voice, fueling my resolve. I survived despite you, Victoria, not because of you. You look at me, and you don't see a daughter. You see a safety net. You see a bottomless bank account that exists solely to clean up your reckless, entitled messes. You used the sacred excuse of family to bleed me dry for over a decade. You told me I had to be the responsible one, the mature one, the one who stepped up. But all that actually meant was that I was the one who had to suffer so Amber could play dress-up. I took a sharp step closer to my mother, lowering my voice to a lethal, razor-sharp whisper. But I took that $70,000 of debt, and I turned it into a masterclass. I learned exactly how ruthless, how calculating, and how unyielding I needed to be to survive in a corporate world where even my own biological parents were actively trying to bankrupt me. I took the profound anger and betrayal I felt toward you, and I channeled it directly into every single venture capital deal I ever closed. I built a massive financial empire using the exact same ruthlessness that you taught me, my father. Charles shook his head in absolute disbelief, still clinging tightly to his patriarchal, fragile delusion of authority. You are holding a ridiculous grudge over the past, Chloe. We did what we had to do for the survival of this household. We are your parents. We gave you life. You owe us your absolute respect, and you owe us your compliance. I owe you absolutely nothing, I said, my voice cutting through his entitlement like a buzzsaw. Respect is earned, Charles. You lost mine forever the day you looked me in the eye, lied to me about losing our family home, and watched me drown in suffocating debt so your golden child could buy luxury shoes. You chose your favorite daughter a long time ago. Now, you get to live with the catastrophic consequences of that choice. Amber wiped a tear from her cheek, her face suddenly contorting from fake sadness into pure, unadulterated hatred. You are just a sociopath, Chloe. You have absolutely no heart. You care more about corporate numbers, money, and petty revenge than your own flesh and blood. I care about justice. I corrected her, refusing to break eye contact for even a fraction of a second. And right now, justice means watching you finally face the harsh reality of the real world without my wallet there to protect you. The past is the past. Chloe, my mother, Victoria snapped, her voice rising to a frantic, shrill register that echoed off the expensive wood paneling. Look at you now. You are a powerful CEO. You are sitting on a mountain of venture capital money. Why are you still nickeling and diming your own family over an old $70,000 loan? That is pocket change to you today. You should be thanking us for making you tough, not using your corporate power to bully your little sister and ruin her marriage. I looked at my mother, entirely fascinated by the staggering absolute depth of her delusion. It was a fascinating case study in toxic narcissistic psychology. She truly believed that because I had survived their financial abuse and built an incredibly successful career, the original abuse itself was completely retroactively justified. I am a multimillionaire today because I survived. Despite you, Victoria. Not because of you. I said, my voice dropping into a register of absolute unshakable ice. You look at me and you don't see a daughter who worked herself to the bone. You see an infinite insurance policy. You see a bottomless ATM that exists solely to absorb the catastrophic financial wreckage of the absolute monster you raised in amber. I stepped around the edge of the dining table, closing the physical distance between us, until my mother was forced to take a step back, her back hitting the edge of the plush leather banquette. You think I am holding a petty grudge? I continued, ensuring every single word landed with surgical precision. No, Victoria. I am enforcing a boundary. For over a decade, you have used the concept of family as an emotional weapon to bleed me dry. You told me I had to be the responsible one. You told me I had to be the mature one. But what you actually meant was that I was required to suffer in silence so that Amber could play dress-up on social media with a stolen lifestyle. Charles took a massive, aggressive step forward, puffing out his chest in a desperate, pathetic attempt to reclaim his shattered patriarchal authority. He pointed a trembling, thick finger right at my face. That is enough. Chloe. Charles bellowed, his face turning an ugly, mottled shade of crimson. I am still your father, and I demand that you watch your tone. We did what we had to do to manage this household. You were always the strong one, the independent one who could figure things out on her own. Amber needed our protection. She needed our help. You have an obligation to respect my decisions and support this family. I owe you absolutely nothing, Charles, I said, turning my gaze to lock onto him with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. Respect is a currency you completely bankrupt years ago. You lost any right to demand my respect. The exact second you looked me in the eye, lied to me about our family losing its home, and watched me drown in suffocating collections debt, just so your favored child could buy designer shoes in Beverly Hills. You made your choice a long time ago. You chose your golden child. Now you get to live with the absolute destruction that comes with that choice. Amber let out a loud, dramatic, theatrical sob, burying her face into her hands. You are a literal sociopath, Chloe. You have absolutely no heart. You care more about corporate numbers, bank accounts, and petty revenge than your own flesh and blood. You are enjoying this. I am enjoying the absolute clarity of this moment, Amber. I corrected her, refusing to break eye contact for even a fraction of a second. For years, you have treated me like a boring, second-rate citizen, because I didn't care about luxury logos or social media clout. You sneered at my apartment, you laughed at my clothes, and you treated my boundaries like a joke. You took my car because you genuinely believed I was too weak, too passive, and too desperate for your approval to ever fight back. I looked at all three of them, taking in their panicked, furious, and ugly expressions. The grand illusion of their Silicon Valley superiority had completely melted away, leaving nothing but three desperate grifters, cornered in a high-end restaurant. You relied entirely on my historical strategy of keeping the peace, I stated calmly. You thought I would stay quiet to protect the family name, or to avoid making a scene in front of Grandma Evelyn. But you completely miscalculated the math. The version of Chloe that allowed you to manipulate her died the day she signed that $70,000 debt waiver. The woman standing in front of you today is a venture capitalist. I dismantle fraudulent operations for a living. And tonight, I am dismantling yours. You can't do this to us. Victoria shrieked, tears of pure anger finally welling in her eyes. We are your parents. What will people say? What will our friends at the country club think if our own daughter files criminal charges against us? You will ruin our entire social standing in this city. Then I suggest you start preparing your public relations statement, Victoria, I replied with a razor-sharp smile. Because by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the police report will be filed, the insurance fraud investigators will be notified, and the corporate lawyers at Aegis Ventures will begin the formal asset recovery process. If your precious country club friends find out you are common thieves, that is your problem to manage, not mine. Charles glared at me, his eyes narrowing into a dangerous, desperate expression. He looked like a man who knew he was completely out of options, but was still arrogant enough to believe he could pull one shaggled card from his sleeve to force my absolute compliance. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket, his jaw clenched tight, with a volatile mixture of pure hatred and malicious intent. Charles slowly pulled his hand out of his jacket pocket, his jaw clenched tight, with a volatile mixture of pure hatred and malicious intent. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim, gold-embossed leather card holder. He slid a crisp, white corporate business card across the wine-stained white tablecloth, letting it slide right over the damp linen until it hit the edge of my water glass. I looked down. The card bore the logo of Apex Software Solutions, his boutique technology consulting and software outsourcing firm. Right beneath his name, in bold, aggressive lettering, was my name, Chloe Sterling, Principal Strategic Technology Advisor. You think you have all the power here, Chloe? Charles said, his voice dropping into a low, vicious sneer as he leaned heavily over the table, trying to use his physical height to intimidate me. You think that just because you managed to hustle your way into some fancy venture capital fund, you are completely untouchable. You forgot one very critical, very expensive detail. You are still legally contracted on the executive payroll of my firm. You are still my employee. I stared at the card, then looked up at him, maintaining my absolute, unshakable stillness. Tomorrow morning at precisely 8 a.m. Charles hissed, a sinister, triumphant grin spreading across his face. I am officially terminating your employment contract for gross insubordination and corporate espionage. Not only will you lose your baseline advisor salary, but I am going to use my 30 years of deep, historical networking in the Silicon Valley tech corridor to blackball your name from every single technology circle in Northern California. I will personally call every tech founder, every angel investor, and every software executive I know. By noon tomorrow, your reputation will be completely radioactive. No one will ever co-invest with Aegis Ventures again, and no tech startup will ever accept a single dollar of your capital. I will ruin your career, Chloe. I will ensure you never work in this industry again. Victoria's eyes instantly lit up with a vicious, triumphant gleam. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh, crossing her arms tightly over her designer dress. That's right. You think you are a big-shot CEO, Chloe. Your father built his tech firm long before you even knew how to write a basic line of code. He has deep roots in this valley. If he blackballs you, your precious little $800 million fund will rot from the inside out, because no one will dare do business with you. You better think very carefully about your next move before you destroy everything you worked for. Amber chimed in, wiping her tears away as a smug, vicious smirk returned to her face. Yeah, fire her, Dad. Let's see how powerful you are when you're standing in the unemployment line, you ungrateful, jealous freak. The sheer staggering magnitude of their collective delusion was almost breathtaking. It was a beautiful, pure comedy of absolute ignorance. They were standing in the middle of a high-end restaurant in the absolute heart of the global technology universe, trying to threaten a powerhouse venture capitalist with a low-level local blacklist. They truly believed that Charles's small, outdated software consulting company carried the kind of systemic leverage that could move an institutional investor. I did not flinch, did not panic. Instead, I let out a low, soft, genuinely amused laugh. It was the first time all evening that a real smile spread across my face, a smile of absolute clinical amusement. "You are going to blackball me, Charles?" I asked, my voice dripping with cool conversational mockery. "You are going to destroy my reputation in Silicon Valley?" Without taking my eyes off him, I calmly reached into the pocket of my tailored charcoal jacket and pulled out my highly secure encrypted corporate smartphone. I tapped the screen, biometrically unlocked the device with a quick facial scan, and pulled up my firm's secure legal data repository. My fingers glid across the glass screen, scrolling past massive, high-stakes tech acquisition files, multi-million-dollar funding rounds, and non-disclosure agreements, until I found one specific, heavily encrypted corporate document. I held the phone up, turning the bright screen directly toward my father's face. "I want you to take a very close look at this legal filing, Charles Miles," I said, my voice dropping into a tone of chilling, supreme confidence that made his triumphant smile falter in real time. "Go ahead, read the top line of the document out loud for the table." Charles squinted his eyes, leaning forward to look at the screen. The moment his eyes locked onto the official electronic stamp of the California Secretary of State and the corporate registration numbers, the arrogant, puffed-up posture he had maintained all night vanished instantly. His face completely drained of color, turning a sickly, hollow shade of ash gray. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "What is it?" Charles Victoria asked, her voice tightening with a sudden, violent surge of panic as she watched her husband's face completely fall apart. "What does it say?" "Tell her she's bluffing." I pulled the phone back, looking at the document myself with a cold corporate satisfaction. "He can't answer you, Victoria." "Because his entire world just dissolved," I said, looking directly at my father. "You are threatening to fire me from a company that hasn't legally existed in 48 hours. You are threatening to use your tech network to blackball a woman who literally holds the debt notes to your entire life. So let me ask you a very simple, very basic business question. Charles, how exactly do you plan to fire me from a firm that is currently dead on arrival?" Charles stumbled backward, his hand blindly gripping the edge of his chair to keep himself from collapsing onto the hardwood floor. His breathing became incredibly shallow, his eyes wide and completely unfocused as they stared at the official digital document on my smartphone screen. "No, no, that's impossible," Charles stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. The restructuring phase was supposed to give us 6 more months. The corporate attorneys assured me the filing wouldn't go through until the next fiscal quarter. "How do you have access to these files?" "Chloe, this is highly confidential. Internal company data." I lowered my phone, letting the screen dim, and looked at my father with absolute clinical pity. "It was confidential, Charles, until your primary institutional creditor decided to liquidate your entire debt portfolio," I explained, my voice cutting through his panic with the cold authority of a federal judge. "Your boutique consulting firm has been bleeding cash for 3 consecutive years because you were too busy leasing luxury sports cars and buying fake watches to actually pay your senior software engineers. You took out a massive, toxic $5 million line of credit with an offshore asset management group to keep your company afloat. What you fundamentally failed to realize is that 48 hours ago, Aegis Ventures officially acquired that exact asset management group. I purchased your debt, Charles. And the very first executive order I signed as the new parent company owner was to call in the loan, deny your extension, and trigger an immediate asset seizure. Victoria's jaw dropped so low it looked as though it might unhinge. She looked frantically between her hyperventilating husband and my frozen smartphone. Charles. What is she talking about? What loan? You told me the company was doing completely fine. You told me we were expanding into artificial intelligence. He lied to you, Victoria, I said, turning my gaze to my mother, letting her feel the absolute weight of her catastrophic reality. Just like he lied to Marcus, just like you both lied to me for a decade. The firm is completely bankrupt. By the end of this business week, the federal court will officially transition this filing from a Chapter 11 corporate restructuring to a Chapter 7 total liquidation. Federal asset trustees will arrive at your house in Palo Alto. They will seize the leased luxury vehicles, freeze your premium credit lines, and auction off every single piece of designer clothing, every piece of furniture, and every piece of jewelry you bought with my stolen future. Amber let out a high-pitched, piercing shriek of absolute, unadulterated horror. She threw herself onto the table, her hands wildly swatting at the air. No, you can't let them do that. Chloe, my entire lifestyle brand is built on my home aesthetic. If they take my clothes and freeze my accounts, I am completely ruined. Marcus will never come back to me if I'm poor and homeless. You have $800 million. Just pay off Dad's loan. It's just $5 million. It is literally pocket change to you. I stood tall, entirely unbothered by her desperate theatrical tantrum. $5 million is indeed a minor transaction for my firm Amber. But I do not invest corporate capital into fraudulent, toxic dyeing operations. And I certainly do not invest my personal money into people who steal my property in the dead of night. Beside me, my grandmother Evelyn slowly stood up. She smoothed down the front of her elegant, timeless silk blouse, her movements entirely graceful and completely devoid of any stress. She picked up her luxury handbag, hung it over her forearm, and looked at my parents one final time, with eyes that had watched the absolute collapse of global financial markets without a single blink. You two are an absolute disgrace to the financial legacy I built, Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a register of pure aristocratic ice that silenced Amber's screaming instantly. You stole from the only child who actually possessed the intelligence and the grit to carry this family name forward. You pampered a parasite and punished a prodigy. Enjoy the absolute bankruptcy you so thoroughly earned. Come along, Chloe. The air in this room has become entirely suffocating. I picked up the matte Zamek grey Tesla key card from the white tablecloth, slipping it smoothly back into the pocket of my tailored charcoal jacket. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer a single word of closure. I simply turned my back on the screaming, the crying, and the complete catastrophic destruction of their artificial lives, and walked toward the exit. As the heavy, frosted glass doors of the private dining room clicked shut behind us, cutting off the final, desperate echoes of my mother's frantic screaming, a profound, beautiful sense of peace washed completely over me. For 15 years, I had carried the invisible, exhausting weight of their toxic expectations, their endless gaslighting, and their relentless greed. I had stayed quiet, thinking that my silence would eventually buy me their love, or at the very least, a basic measure of peace. But tonight, I finally understood that silence isn't weakness. Silence is simply the quiet, steady accumulation of overwhelming leverage. When you finally decide to strike back against the people who broke you, you don't need to scream, you don't need to cry, and you don't need to make a theatrical scene. You simply let the unyielding, objective machinery of the law and the market do the work for you. I stepped out of the high-end restaurant and into the cool, crisp Silicon Valley night air, feeling completely, entirely free. What would you have done if your own biological family stole a $140,000 corporate asset right out of your private garage just to fund a massive lie? Would you have stayed quiet to protect the family name? Or would you have let the full destructive weight of the law crush them entirely? Let me know your absolute thoughts and your own personal stories with toxic, narcissistic relatives in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more high-stakes legal updates. I will see you all in the next video.